Welcome to Personal and Professional Best. We all share 6 areas of life: family and relationships, health and fitness, personal finance, faith and/or community service, fun and recreation, and business, our professional careers. Every year, all Supreme Southeast Associates begin the year by creating written goals in each of the 6 areas of life. And each month in this program, I sit down with a dynamic leader to inspire all of us on our journey to realizing our goals, the journey to our destination, which is best. Through the years, I've had the incredible privilege to sit down with many of my personal and professional heroes, ordinary people like you and me, ordinary people who have lived and are living extraordinary lives, coaches, pastors, authors, athletes, and business leaders whose experiences, challenges, failures, and triumphs create a blueprint, a game plan to help inspire all of us to do what they've done, to live our best lives. This year, we set an ambitious theme to not just make 2022 another trip around the sun, but rather to build a championship season in 2022. It was a year filled with triumph, but as well, a year that we all faced unique and unforeseen challenges, and there have been many. On today's program, we take a look back at some of the key messages that the leaders have shared with all of us. The fourth quarter, and there are just a few minutes left on the clock for 2022, it's not time yet to line up for victory formation. Instead, it's time to hunker down for the last few plays that could very well make 2022 a championship season for the ages. This is Personal and Professional Best. In January, I headed to T-Town, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, to sit down with sports psychologist and coach Nick Saban's head coach, Dr. Kevin Elko. I was hoping to celebrate another championship season for my favorite team, the Alabama Crimson Tide. The Georgia Bulldogs, they had other plans. For the first time since 1980, the Bulldogs climbed the mountain and defeated the Tide to forever mark the 2021 season as a championship season at the University of Georgia. It was hard to feel disappointed, however, knowing that so many of my neighbors and friends were celebrating UGA's first championship in 40 years. Dr. Elko and I sat down the morning after the national championship game at the famous Rama Jamma restaurant in the shadow of Bryant-Denny Stadium to discuss the unique qualities that all championship players and championship teams possess.
There, I knew there was a trust there in coaching each other.
You know, you hear about championship teams. Let's talk about that. Whether it's, family for all of the folks that are listening, or the team that we all inevitably are involved with when we're in a business. And you hear the term, they have great chemistry. They're selfless. And you'll hear that mostly when they're talking about a championship team. Right? You've been around 31 championship teams. What characteristics do championship teams have? Because I think in terms of what we can learn from you about championship teams, about how we would be better in our families and better in our workplaces to make the team better. What are some of those things that you think about when you see those teams? What are those characteristics, Kevin?
It's one, ownership. It's one. And what happens is they get inside groups. And with every one of these championships I've been involved with, they're inside units and they keep each other accountable. Accountable isn't punishment. Accountable is the whole concept of ownership. And it's different. And the ones I've been around, they've been accountable in the whole areas. No self-pity, quit getting offended, get to a point where you're pushing yourself and be able to be coached. If I would tell you there's an overarching concept of ownership, It's not your feelings, your choices. You're never going to be as talented as your gifts. You're going to accomplish as far as you can make choices. And so I feel like getting offended, choose not to, choose to be coached. I feel like going into self-pity, I'm going to choose to keep pushing. I feel like quitting, but I'm going to choose to keep going. I feel like holding a grudge, but I'm going to let it go. And so the big thing is accountability with one another inside the unit. That's the number one factor. I've seen it everywhere I've gone.
So each individual in the family being accountable to contribute based on their choices so that the team, the family, can become its very best. And the same thing in the workplace as well. Rather than talking negatively about others and what they're not and what they're, just owning up to your own stuff and making choices to bring your very best every day. Is that it?
And it's one more thing, Pat, paying attention. It's paying attention. If we got people at Supreme, it's okay, we have something we think are good for people. This is fabulous for people. And you got your group together and said, okay, every time you present to someone and ask for business, make a little note and bring it back to us and tell us at the end of the day. Accountability is a lot about paying attention. So let's just say, hypothetically, we want to, I just saw like a quadruple decker sandwich come by, so let's do that one. Let's just say we want to be accountable with our diet. So we'd go, okay, me, you, Ty, geez, we're going to take today, and everything we eat, we're going to write it down. And then we're going to tell one another at the end of the day, here's what we did. Just be accountable with blessings. Here's the people I reached out to try to encourage today. And you're not bragging, you're telling people, okay, here's what I did. It's the science of paying attention. And discipline all points to the science of paying attention. And we don't pay attention. So whatever matters in your life, you're paying attention to those behaviors all day long that take me to what matters. That's what accountability is.
Thank you, Dr. Elko, for those insights regarding accountability. So we've made our goals and we have accountability in place. And why don't all of us just simply achieve our goals? Well, it's simple. We're all creatures of habit. And changing our behavior requires us to change our habits in order to find best. In February, we were joined by Charles Duhigg, best-selling author of The Power of Habits, to discuss how all of us can do just that, change our habits. What is, in the simplest of terms, what is a habit?
Well, it's a great question, and it's a little bit more complicated to do that. Let me tell you a quick story. I actually put together some slides for this. So there was this woman named Dr. Anne Graybiel, who's a researcher at MIT. And about 20 years ago, she decided to start doing experiments with rats. And her first goal was to get sensors into a rat's cranium so she could kind of measure what was happening inside their brain as they went about their daily business. And it took her a little while to figure out how to do this, but eventually she got to where she could get about 17 sensors inside a rat's brain and observe its neural activity. And what she would do is she would put every single rat in the world's simplest maze. Now, this maze works the same way every single time. There's a click, that partition there would move, and then the rat's free to run up and down the maze looking for the chocolate. Now, the first time you drop a rat in a maze like this, it takes it about 20 minutes to find that chocolate. And that seems like a kind of oddly long time. And so Dr. Graybiel was kind of curious, like maybe the rat's just lazy or it's not thinking very hard. But she was able to see what's going on inside the rat's brain. This graph you see right here, that's a simplified neurological graph of the first time that a rat runs through a maze like this. And you see all those spikes in the graph? That's the rat trying to make sense of what's going on. So the partition moves, and the rat starts scratching the walls, and the motor vehicle parts of its brain light up with activity. And then it sniffs the air, and the olfactory senses start becoming active inside its brain. And then it starts running up and down, and eventually, after about 20 minutes, it finds that chocolate, and there's this reward sensation inside the rat's brain. And this is a big finding. Dr. Graybiel publishes this. But then she does something interesting. She takes each rat and she drops it in the maze again and again and again. And unsurprisingly, over time, the rat gets faster and faster and faster finding the chocolate, right? Click, the partition moves, the rat starts making a beeline to the chocolate. What's really interesting, though, is that as the rat gets faster and faster and faster, it starts thinking less and less and less. In fact, if you look at this graph on the right, what you'll see is a simplified neurological graph of about the 50th iteration through that maze. And that deep valley in cognitive thinking, that's the same drop off you would see if the rat was falling asleep. What we know is that as you get into the pattern of doing something over and over and over again, as it becomes a habit, we start thinking about it less and less and less. And this is actually really useful for our brain because our brain wants to conserve mental energy whenever it can. In fact, there's a part of our brain known as the basal ganglia that exists just to make habits. Because without that, we would have never evolved into people who can invent fire or video games or anything else. But what's interesting about this drop-off is that it follows kind of a formula. And it's known as the habit loop. If you look for a second at the beginning of that maze, you see that click? There's this burst of neurological activity, right? And then a drop-off as the rat runs through the maze. And then when it finds the chocolate at the end of the maze, it starts thinking hard again. It's as if its brain starts to shake itself to pay attention to what's going on. This is the neurological signature of a habit. Every single habit in your life, and there 40 to 45% of what you do every day is a habit. Every habit inside your life, if I could look inside your brain, I would see this. And what it tells us is this. Every habit has three parts. There's a cue, which is like that click, something that triggers an automatic behavior. And then there's the routine, the behavior itself, what we think of as the habit. And then at the end of that, there is a reward. You might notice it, you might not, but your brain notices it. And it takes that cue, routine, and that reward, and it chunks them together, and it makes a habit inside your brain that makes it easier and easier and easier to do whatever you're thinking of.
So a little bit like we wake up in the morning, we go into the bathroom, and then we brush our teeth, right? So that we don't think about doing that. Now, maybe when we were young, our parents told us to do it, but once you start doing it over and over again, it just becomes one of those things that you just do. And we live, you said 40 to 50% of our lives in that way.
Absolutely. Every single day, 40 to 45%, about half of what you do. And it's fascinating you bring up the teeth brushing example, because one of the things that we found, and anyone who has kids, you know this, it's like pulling teeth to get them to brush their teeth, right? It's like the hardest thing on earth. And yet, if you're like me, I come out of the shower, if I don't have that minty feeling inside my mouth, I don't.
The reward. Right, exactly.
Is that teeth brushing only became a habit when they started using mint and toothpaste, so that you had this physical sensation. That sensation inside your mouth, that's actually the reward. You start to associate that. Your brain starts to associate that with a sense of cleanliness.
Leave it to America to learn how to sell something, right? We need to sell more toothpaste. We got to get more young kids to brush their teeth more often. So give them a reward. Chocolate, no. Let's give them mint with their toothpaste. Exactly. I love it. Thank you, Charles. We all need to identify our habits, our triggers, and our rewards, and create new rewards for ourselves as motivation to practice better habits. In March, we started sensing that the business winds were changing direction in housing. And what had been a relatively easy environment was beginning to get, a bit more complicated. What's the normal reaction? It's simple. Complain loudly and often to everyone in your life. We knew there was a better way. As the sign says behind me, complacency is the enemy of best, and complaining is the arch enemy of best. So we invited best-selling author Jon Gordon back to our program to discuss his business fable, the no complaining rule. Is complaining actually really complaining to God as opposed to complaining about other people or circumstances? Isn't it really about complaining back to God?
I think that's a huge part of it. I do believe that when we're complaining, we limit ourselves and we limit God. We're actually putting our faith towards worry, our faith towards what's not possible. We're complaining about the way things are, and we don't believe that God can solve the problem. It actually means we're not trusting in God, and we're not putting our faith in Him during those moments. We're complaining because we feel powerless, and in those moments we complain. What we really should be doing is trusting and putting faith. I think about your dad. That story you told is just so powerful because he could have cursed God. God, why did you do this, to us and to our family? My wife left us and left our kids. And his demonstration of faith, modeling that, changed your family, changed your future, and changed you, Pat. I know you're the leader you are and the impact that you're now having on tens of thousands and millions of people around the world as a result of your dad's example of faith. He didn't curse, right? He accepted what is, and he said, I'm going to control what I can control. I'm going to impact these kids' lives, and I'm going to trust in God in those moments. Your mom's response was very different. Same event. I often say one day you're in traffic and it bothers you. The next day you're in the same traffic and it doesn't. Is the traffic? It's never the traffic. It's never the circumstance. It's always our state of mind, our level of consciousness, and how we respond to the events in our life. And he responded very different. He had a different level of consciousness. She saw the circumstances more powerful than her. Your dad saw his faith and God as greater than the circumstance. And so the Israelites in the desert, think about that. God delivers them from Egypt. They are now free. They're in the wilderness. And what happens? They start complaining. They complain that they're hungry. There's not enough food.
At least we had cucumbers back when we were slaves, right?
Right. Why did you bring us into the desert where we now are starving? At least there we could eat and we had food. Meanwhile, you were enslaved. They would rather be enslaved and not free and have comfort and security than actually stepping out into the wilderness and have to trust in God and have faith. See, that's what God's really about. God was about, and he was so angry at the Israelites during that, he actually even threatened to destroy all of them. So that shows us how God feels about complaining. And that's the Old Testament. The New Testament, Jesus would just love them. But in the Old Testament, God wanted to destroy them. Moses spoke to God on their behalf saying, no, just give him a chance. And God was so upset because basically they weren't trusting in God. They were trusting in their circumstances and not looking to him with faith. Then he would provide them with manna, he provided them with food, right? Over and over again, he would perform a miracle and then they would receive it and they'd be like, all right, thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. And then they would forget again. They would forget about all the miracles that he did and they would start to complain. And that's what happens to us as well. Like we have these amazing miracles that happen in our lives. And so often we forget those miracles. When we're dealt with difficult situations and circumstances, a lot of times we forget what God did for us in the past. And I'm often reminded, and I remind myself during scary moments, fearful moments like COVID when it hit, I reminded myself during that time, God carried you through the most difficult times in your life, when you were almost bankrupt, when you had nothing, when your wife almost left you, when you didn't know how you're going to pay the bills. You saw God carry you. And guess what? He will carry you during this time as well. So I complained, I want to admit, I want to be very transparent. I complained like the first week of COVID about when everything was shut down. What are we going to do? How are we going to move forward? My wife once again said, hey, where's that positive guy who wrote all these positive books? I'm like, you're right. I stepped in faith. I said, all right, God, you did it once. I'm going to trust in you again. And I'm going to trust in you. And man, my faith grew so much during the last few years because I saw how that faith was rewarded. I saw how it carried me. And I know many examples of the companies I work with, and just like you, where so many great faithful leaders thrived during this time.
The best business leaders are expert negotiators. For April and May, we sat down with the female Jerry Maguire, renowned sports agent and author, Molly Fletcher. She offered keen insights for all of us on how we can negotiate like champions. And it all starts by picking up the phone.
So the first impression matters. We live in a world today where people have gotten so accustomed to not communicating in person, right? Sure. And when someone's buying as a athlete, they're buying an agent, a very personal representation. They're going to spend a lot of money, sure, and they're buying you representing them, right? In our case, they're going through it. One of the most 10 most stressful experiences in one's lifetime. Oftentimes it's in the top 5, which is moving. And the idea that they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on a home, and they're spending a lot of money on a mortgage. They're spending a lot of money. It's similar. I mean, they really want that person to make it personal. We compete a lot all of us do now in the digital world. And we're in the brick and mortar world. So it's got to be even more personal. What do you say to folks who the first call comes in and it's a new potential client and you click them to voicemail or you text them back, I'm busy, call you later. What do you say to them?
If you want to lose a deal, send them to voicemail. If you want to lose a deal, send them to a website. I mean, to me, there is something so powerful in people communicating, and we can't send people to websites. We can't send people to voicemail. I mean, I'll be honest with you, my athletes, I don't even think they knew what my voicemail sounded like. Literally. They didn't go to voicemail. And I'm not sure that, I mean, I used to sleep with my phone. I had my pajamas with pockets in it. So I had my phone with me, and I'm not sure that's something to sort of raise a, green flag around, but we have to connect. And when we can get somebody on the phone, we can get curious. We can ask great questions. We can listen. We can get in their world and know what drives them, because sometimes the things that drive somebody are so far from what our assumptions about what might matter to them really are. I mean, the things that sometimes would drive a player to in free agency to switch a team, or a golfer to switch balls, or hat bag deal, whatever it might be, it was so different often than the world would make assumptions around.
And you were just being curious about that person and their story.
Absolutely.
And their specific drive, so that you don't make any assumptions that theirs is like everyone else's, because it's not.
No, and you can't get that information via email. You can't get that kind of information via text, or even on social media, or even on LinkedIn. I mean, you can get some high-level surface stuff that everybody else is getting, but as you and I have said before, if you do everything else like everybody else, you're going to get everybody else's results.
And we don't want that.
And that's what we want. So I think more than ever, you've got to pick up the phone and call them. You've got to connect. And I think, I'm a big fan of, serve, and then you maybe ask. And then serve, add value, and then maybe you ask. But you deliver value to a point. I mean, when I would recruit a baseball player, or a golfer, or a college coach, or an NBA coach, or a LPGA player, I would over-deliver so much that no was sort of impossible. How could you say no? How could you even ask about fees? Because I've given you a sense for what this relationship's going to be like.
One of the key areas of all of our lives is our faith journey. Regardless of our belief system, the best way to put our faith into action is by serving others. In June, we were joined by Marcy Fair. Not only have Marcy and her husband Brian built a great career in real estate, they've also found a meaningful way to give back. Cares for Kids, a nonprofit organization that has now helped over 500,000 children with everything from a meal, a backpack full of school supplies, or stocked school library. I asked Marcy a meaningful question. What was her motivation to not just give back, but instead to start an organization that has now helped so many kids in need? Cares for Kids thing, okay? Where did it start? Like, what was the impetus that gave you this vision to create this Cares for Kids organization? What happened?
Well, I always knew that I wanted to give back. But when we got out of college, we have what I call negative nothing. So we had mice.
I know that.
You know that.
I got out of college, and Lisa and
You
I were
had
married at
negative
the time
nothing too?
Yes. As I tell people, that the mice they would not have taken anything from us. They're like, if you
There was
have
nothing.
nothing.
There was nothing to take.
They probably brought things back to us.
Yeah. In
You
the early
too?
days, we had ramen, and if it was a really good week, we'd have ramen with carrots. And that was, So, but in March of 1990, so I'm only a couple years out of school, I actually reserved a charity name with the Secretary of State. I had no idea what I was doing, which is a common theme in my life, but I reserved a name thinking that was what you needed to do, and it was free. And I still have that document. It's in a dream book that I created in those early years. And, but it took me 15 years to figure out how to start it. And I am unlike a lot of charity founders in that I have had a very fortunate life. I have had what matters most. I've had the deep, deep love of my mom and dad my entire life. And I started Cares for Kids because it breaks my heart thinking about the kids who don't have that. I just, I can't imagine what some of these kids have been through. And so that was how the idea of a charity, I knew I wanted to help children. They're our future leaders. They have everything in front of them and their situations are beyond their control. And so if we can help them and we can give them that spark that someone out there believes in them, our word for the charity is hope. And so everything we're doing, we're trying to give those children hope at just the right time.
Sure.
I love The Butterfly Effect by Andy Andrews, and we have no idea the long-term impact, but we are trying very hard to go where our local children need help the most.
July starts off with a bang, literally, the fireworks of the 4th of July. However, during an election year, the holiday can sometimes hit just a bit differently. Our television are full of political commercial. Our Facebook feeds are filled with many of our relatives, our friends, our neighbors, adding their own commentary to the political theater. What should be our role as citizens, and especially people of faith in this process? We were joined by my pastor, Andy Stanley, to discuss his incredible book, Not In It to Win It, to show us all a better way. I mean, we've now had the emergence of 24/7, 365 news. Well, it's really the right news or the left news. And then we have social media, which seems like a place where once you gain your narrative on the right or the left from the news, you actually can go to the town hall called social media and tell everybody why you're right. And you have the narrative to do it. Is the news media, are they helping or are they the biggest driver of the narratives that are taking place to attempt to win?
Well, I was actually a journalism major as well, so it's interesting that you say that. I'm not sure I knew that about you, Pat, but it kind of makes sense. And one of the things you discovered and I discovered in journalism school is that journalism attracts a certain kind of person. Just like I think ministry attracts a certain kind of person, different temperaments and personalities, but there's, the folks I was in school with and did my, undergrad with and at Georgia State University, we all had some things in common. We were both curious and we were critical. There's just kind of a critical bent. I walk into a room and unfortunately I see everything wrong. My eye goes to the thing to criticize. So I don't think the problem is the media. I think one of the great things about living in our country is not necessarily the 24-hour, 24/7 news cycle, but the fact that we have a free press. And people are constantly criticizing the press. And I'm like, hey, you just need to visit some other countries where it's controlled. It is better to have misinformation than someone controlling the information. Because eventually, if you're controlling the information, you're determining what's true. So I'll take our problems with the mainstream media any day compared to, if we think about what's happening with Putin right now in the world, he's controlling the narrative. Well, that means he's controlling essentially what is true and what's not true. So I don't think the media is the problem. And you know this as well. You're a business person. We learned this in journalism school. Nobody cares how many Amtrak trains arrived safely and on time. Nobody cares. Everybody wants to know about the one where there was an accident. And again, whether they want to know about it or not, you stop and you stare, right? None of us stop and stare at the cars that are parked safely on the side of the highway. We slow down to look at accidents. I don't know what that says about us, but it's human nature, which means in the media, the only way to make any money is to go to the extremes. The extremes are made in the money's made in the extremes. And in terms of social media, you gather followers and friends in the extremes. So unfortunately, the conversations are more extreme than the reality. And most of the folks, watching or listening today, they're just wonderful people trying to, feed their family, make a living, save a few dollars, prepare for the future. enjoy their lives. So we don't live in those extremes. I'm not even sure you can live in those extremes unless you're making a living ginning up fear on either side. So I'm not critical of mainstream media. I'm glad we have a free press. What complicates it, to your point, is now everybody has a microphone, right? Social media gives everybody a microphone. And, again, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it's a thing. It's just, I encourage the people in our churches constantly, look, problems are solved, and I get criticized for this. Problems are solved in the middle. You do not solve problems in the extremes, ever. You solve problems in the middle, not because you're compromising your beliefs, but because sometimes you have to compromise on issues to get anything done. And at the state level, in most of the states in the United States, amazing things get done at the state level because there's not the media polarization other than during election years that you see nationally. So I don't think, this may be naive, I don't think things are as bad as we are led to believe they are, because you only make money and you can only keep eyeballs on your network if you're ginning up fear on one side or the other. And then the other thing, and then we can move on. And again, we learned this in school, right? That the best way to gain followers and to gain traction and to raise money is to convince your followers that the other side is winning. You can't ever pitch this like we're winning, because if people think we're winning, they're going to take their foot off the gas and they're going to take their foot off. They're going to put their checkbook away, right? So both sides are constantly trying to convince their side we're about to lose, and if the Republicans win, here's what's going to happen. If the Democrats are in charge, here's what's going to happen. And I just say to folks all the time, look, that's never going to change. But could we be mature enough to recognize that, not give into that, and move forward, and let's love people, prioritize people, because, and then I'll end the answer to this question, what we can agree on is this: what's best for people is what's best. And we may disagree on what's best for people, but as long as we agree what's best for the majority of people is what's best, we can solve problems, we can move forward. And when I see people in my position, pastors, religious leaders, abandoning that middle space, which means there's no nuance, which means you can't even have a conversation. As a Christian who believes in a sovereign God, we should be fearless, and we should be moving people to the place where problems are solved because we care about people.
When I think about Tim Tebow, I think about success. 2 national championships, a Heisman Trophy win, all of it at the University of Florida. And then his success, however brief, in the NFL, and his now successful broadcasting career. But it hasn't been an easy road for Tim Tebow. Through it all, he's remained faithful to his faith and his values, and they've propelled him every step of the way. When Tim Tebow joined our program this year, he spoke candidly about some of the challenges he's faced and how it propels him ever forward on his own pursuit of best. My favorite takeaway was our candid discussion about comparing ourselves to others.
They're not going to be Tim Tebow. They're not going to be Pat Flood. They'll be whoever it is that they are, and they ought to pursue that.
That's exactly right. Whoever God created them to be, you know what? He's given us all different talents, opportunities, relationships, abilities, and our goal shouldn't be to be like somebody else. You know, one of the most staggering statistics I've seen is that 12% of our daily thoughts are spent in some form of comparison.
Mm.
You know, if we spend our day trying to compare ourselves against someone else, there's no chance we have at being the best of who God created us to be. Right?
Yep.
God didn't make me to be like you. He made me to be the best version of me, with his help, right? God didn't make you to be like me. We don't have to spend our life trying to be like somebody else. We're not going to be a good duplicate.
No.
The only chance we can have of being our best is by being confident in who God's created us to be. That doesn't mean that we settle not getting better. It means, you know what? If God wanted me taller, he would have made me taller. If he wanted me shorter, he would have made me shorter. But I'm fearfully and wonderfully made.
Just the way you are.
Just the way I am.
Yeah.
And you know what? I want to maximize all the talents and resources and abilities that God has given me. And not all of us have the chance to be the best in different things. I'll hear parents tell kids, or I hear teachers, or I'll hear coaches tell kids, you have the chance to be the best. And I'll think, well, it might be a basketball coach. And I'm like, The kid can't dribble. And you're telling me he can be the best. That's not true.
It's not true. We got to be honest with him.
You
right?
got to be honest. And it's false.
Yeah.
It's false advertisement. That kid's never going to beat LeBron.
No.
It's just not going to happen. But maybe God didn't design him to go beat LeBron in basketball. But how God designed him is to be incredible at the talents and the abilities and everything that God has given him, because he's got a unique purpose. And purpose just means the reason something is done, used, created, or exists, right? He might have been created for something different than just basketball. And so we need to encourage kids that they can be their best in what they have been called to and what they've been created for, not necessarily the best in just something that is public facing where you're always comparing to other people, right? Not everybody, because, you know, being the best is exclusive. There's only going to be one in each category, right?
Exactly, right.
You know, so if you say that, then if you say you all can be the best, what are you going to take turns? You know, like, it doesn't make any sense. So we need to encourage people that in certain categories, you might never be the best. Now you can strive for it. You can try, but I'm not going to tell each one of you that you can be the best in that category. But I totally believe with all of my heart that every single one of you can always strive to be your best.
Absolutely.
That's what we should be striving for.
You know, that is such sound advice for people, because they are always pursuing things to be like somebody else, to get the fame, the fortune, to get something that someone else has, instead of just realizing that God made them perfect.
That's right.
If they'll just pursue whatever that is. And as you know, that requires you to kind of invest yourself a little bit in asking the questions and really having people in your life. When I coached traveling sports, I told the parents, I will never tell them to run faster. I'll tell them to run their fastest. Whatever that looks like, we'll get the most out of them as an individual player, and we'll respect whatever that winds up being.
Now, it doesn't mean that you can't have examples that you want to learn from or you want to follow. I think examples are so important, right? I think it's important that we take things from other people that are maybe heroes of us or maybe gone before us that we need to take from, we need to learn from. We can maybe learn from their highs, but also their lows. Maybe learn from what people have done good and maybe learn from mistakes. You know, Proverbs is so clear about that, you know? And so I think it's important for us to have examples, but that doesn't mean we were created to be that person. But we can learn, good or bad, from everybody.
Every now and then, you encounter someone with a truly remarkable life story. Damon West's story is truly that, remarkable. He was a promising young athlete. Then, Damon's life took an unexpected turn to drugs and crime. After committing multiple home invasions, he was sentenced to 65 years in prison. Instead of allowing his environment to cause him to become bitter, he chose to become better. He transformed his own life and the lives of his fellow inmates while in prison. And it all started with an encounter the day before Damon went to prison with an angel in the Dallas County Jail.
So you had Blue Angels. It seems like this Mr. Jackson fellow's another angel that shows up in your life. And sometimes we just miss them because I guess they don't have wings, right? But this guy, he gives you advice about how you can actually honor your mom by not joining a gang. And he gives you advice about how you can kind of survive prison. And he also lays the foundation that God was asking him to lay so that you could be a coffee bean. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, man, Mr. Jackson. So this older black man in Dallas County Jail, you know, he's been in and out of prison all of his life, career criminal. Most positive guy I've ever met, man. This guy had a smile on his face everywhere he went. You couldn't knock the smile off of Jackson's face. And every morning he'd come up to my cell, to my bunk. He'd pick me up like a ray of sunshine in a dark place. He was really, like you said, an angel. And I tell people all the time, Pat, you know, in my life, God never just reached his hand down and put his hand on my head and said, hey, Damon, you're healed. That's not how it worked in my life. What God has done in my life, I can tell you for sure, is he's put people in my life. And when I was younger, these people were like my parents. They were like teachers. They were coaches. People in the community of Port Arthur, Texas that helped raise me. And as I got older, these people that God put on my path took different forms. One of them was a black Muslim man in Dallas County Jail named Mr. Jackson. And I tell people this all the time to illustrate the point that we have to be open and receptive to all of God's messengers, that God can use anybody to get through to us. And if you're closed-minded because your messenger doesn't look the form you think, or as you made it the point so eloquently, not all angels have wings. If we were looking for these angels to have wings, but some of our angels may be people of different faiths. They may be somebody that's totally different of us than society, but God can use anybody. And he sent that man to me in Dallas County Jail, just like he sent those SWAT team officers to pull me out of there. And Mr. Jackson explained to me that day, if you want to honor your mother and father, you want to keep that promise you made, and you want to turn this thing around without getting to a gang, here's what you have to understand. He told me prison was like a pot of boiling water. And he said, in a pot of boiling water, everything has changed. The heat, the pressure, it's so hot in that boiling water. And he said, let's put 3 things in this pot of boiling water and watch how they change. A carrot, an egg, and a coffee bean. And so he walks me through it. The carrot in the pot of boiling water goes in hard, but in minutes later, it becomes soft and mushy and weak. These are people that are beat down by life. The egg goes into the pot of boiling water, has a shell that protects it physically, but inside the shell, the soft liquid core, the egg's heart can become hardened. And he said, you know, if your heart becomes hardened, you're incapable of giving or receiving love. And this happens to people in life. Sometimes we become the egg. But he said the coffee bean had the power to change the pot of boiling water into a pot of coffee. It was the only thing that could change the water. Everything else is changed by the water. Carrots are changed by the water. Eggs are changed by the water. He said, but the coffee bean was the only thing that will change water. He said it is the change agent. And he said the power was inside me, just like the power was inside the coffee bean, to change that pot of boiling water, to change that prison into a pot of coffee. And he's telling me there's tools that you can use to do this. Like your body language says so much. You know, he's telling me that he said you either infect a room when you walk into it with your negative energy, or you affect a room with your positive energy. Infect versus affect. How do we affect the people around us? And he's telling me lessons like you don't have to win all your fights, but you do have to fight all your fights. A huge lesson in life too, Pat, because that says that some days we're going to win and some days we're going to lose. And he's telling me this fighting you're going to have to do in prison to earn your respect in there, you're going to lose most of these fights, but don't even worry about that. Just get up and keep fighting. And the last thing this man ever says to me before I go to prison, the last words this man ever said to me on earth, he said, West, go out there and go be a coffee bean. Be a coffee bean. It was the message that got me through. And it was, you know, Pat, I went through so much of a transformation. You go from May 18th, 2009, the day the jury sentenced me to life in prison. I came back that night to my pod where I was living in Dallas County Jail. And that's the time when I got into the shower. I started crying in the shower the night of my conviction. And I screamed out aloud to Jesus, take me back, please. And man, waiting there with open arms. You know, it's Jesus saying, come on, Damon, I got you. Get on my back. And then I meet this man, this Mr. Jackson, that gives me this message, which I consider that message to come from Christ. It's a very biblical message to me, too, because it's something I can wrap my brain around. It's a combination of the power of the mustard seed, the smallest of the 3 things, the power of the mustard seed, or the kingdom of Christ, the power of Christ is within us. You know, the coffee bean said all that to me.
No person has contributed more to the discussion of leadership than John Maxwell. Throughout this year, John has joined us for the Supreme Leadership Series. This last month, John joined us in our offices to discuss how everything rises and falls on leadership. In this clip, John answers a fundamental question. Is it possible to lead others without first leading yourself?
First question I'd ask is, what are you doing to develop yourself? And the second question is, what are you doing to develop others? And the first question has to be first, because if you don't develop yourself, you have no capacity to develop. You cannot give what you do not have. So to me, develop myself so that I can develop you. And that's the reason. But in leadership, the great leaders, 90% of all leaders never reproduce other leaders. They just have followers. Most leaders never reproduce leaders. They just have followers. But the great leaders reproduce other leaders. And that is extremely intentional. If you're on my team, I'm going to be very quick to find out what your gifts are, what your strengths are, what your passion is, what your temperament is. I'm going to ask myself about 11 questions with you, so that I know, because I've got to find you before I can lead you. And the big miss is we try to lead people. We've not even found them yet. I mean, we found them. They're in our department, but so we know where they are, but we don't know who they are. And a leader, leaders have to lead people individually based upon who they are. Managers lead everybody the same. Leaders lead everybody differently. So I'd find out who you are, what your passion is. I would find out all those things. And then I would ask you, say, now, what's the best way for me to lead you? Different people need different leadership style. What's the best way for me? And I would see, I'm asking all these questions. I'm asking all these questions because one of the things I learned as a leader is the quickest way to give ownership to someone else is not give them answers, but ask them questions. Because the moment you tell me what the best way to lead you, and I lead you that way, now the responsibility is on you to develop and follow. Too quickly, we want to carry the people. And so in empowerment and equipping, I find you by asking these questions, this whole process. And then I go into the equipping, empowering process, of which I do it, you're with me, you do it, and I'm with you, which is the coaching. And then you do it, which now we start empowering, and then you do it, and others are with you. And the reason we've developed so many leaders, and what's really helped us be effective, is the magic in step 5. If I was developing you, before I poured myself into you, the question I'd ask you is, now, who are you going to develop? And if you said, well, I hadn't thought about that, well, I'd say, well, you go think about it. And when you come back with somebody with a name, and the two of you agree that this is what, then we're in the game. But we're not in the game if you're the dead end street. I don't equip anybody to not equip someone else. And so the reproduction comes in that mindset that I am being developed so that I grow, but I'm responsible then to develop someone else.
It's truly been an incredible year on the Personal and Professional Best program. It's been a year full of insights and challenges to help us grow in every area of our lives. But has it been a championship season in 2022? One thing I've learned from interviewing so many champions on this program is that no championship season comes without its fair share of adversity. 2022, it's been a professional season of adversity for many of us in our industry. What had been a season of harvest in 2020 and 2021 would quickly turn into a season of toil. Our hard work without seeing the fruit of that hard work and of that labor. Many of us have allowed this season of professional struggle to spill over into our personal lives. Time at the gym has been sacrificed for an extra hour at the office. We gave up a vacation. A date night was canceled, and a healthy meal was sacrificed for maybe fast food. You see, our professional lives, they're really inseparable from our personal lives. You show me someone who's struggling at work, and chances are that person's struggling at home. This struggle has caused many to give up hope. When is the market ever going to turn around? When are interest rates going to go back down? When will I have a moment to just breathe and enjoy life again? In December, it can be a tough month. The days are shorter, the weather's colder, and business is slower. And oh yeah, there's that little thing called Christmas, and it's looming right around the corner. If you remember when we were kids, Christmas was pure joy, anticipating time off from school and opening all those gifts. As an adult, Christmas often comes with the stress of figuring out childcare, and then how the heck am I going to afford all of these Christmas gifts? How do we reclaim that childlike wonder in this Christmas season? How do we make one last push to indeed make 2022 a championship season? We all need to press pause. You see, the story of Christmas is ultimately the story of hope. It's the story of light entering darkness. It's a promise that whatever our current circumstances are, there's reason to believe that 2023 can be better than 2022. The story of Christmas reveals that whatever mistakes we've made in the past, however much we've fallen short of our goals, there's always reason to have hope in tomorrow. Romans 15:4 says, "For everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through the endurance taught in the scriptures and the encouragement that it provides, we might have hope." As 2022 comes to a close, I pray that you will embrace the message of hope. Opportunity is just around the corner. Better health can be yours in 2023. Better finances can be yours in 2023. And most importantly, better relationships can be yours in 2023. All of us could choose to work together to become our personal and our professional best. And that is ultimately what defines a championship season in life. Best starts here.